Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the Warren Miller Performing Arts Center in Big Sky, Montana for the first ever Community Wildfire Awareness meeting. I'm Joe O'Connor. I'm the managing editor for Mountain Journal. Mojo is a nonprofit digital media group, and we cover the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, focusing on the environment beat, including wildlife and wildlands in this 22.5 million acre ecosystem. It's a lot of work, but it is incredibly fulfilling to be part of that. If you appreciate independent, bold journalism about the GYE in the Northern Rockies, please feel free to visit our website and sign up for our weekly newsletter. Thanks. At Mountain Journal, we bring a science and fact-based lens to our journalism and cover Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks, wildlife connectivity and wildlife disease, water issues, human growth and development, basically all things nature, and we cover wildfire. I spent 2 fire seasons with the Black Mountain Hotshots, a national resource out of Minden, Nevada. It was one of the best jobs I've ever had, and it was certainly one of the toughest. We fought fires all over the country: Alaska, California, Arizona, Colorado, Oregon, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. And that's why we're here today. Because Montana has burned, and Montana will burn again. And Big Sky is in the crosshairs. I want to preface some of this with, this is not a fear-mongering exercise. You know, this is something that I've witnessed, that a bunch of our panelists here have witnessed and are witnessing. Some of you have witnessed this too. But it is important to recognize that where we live, the wildland-urban interface is a big deal. And I think, you know, without a little bit of fear, there can live a little bit of complacency. Big Sky, Montana sits in squarely what's called the WUI, or wildland-urban interface, where homes and structures meet the forest. The chances of Big Sky seeing a major wildfire are higher than 93% of the country. So let that sit in for a second. Now, what are we as a community going to do about it? Well, that's why we're here today. So this is the agenda. Learn more after the event. There are sign-up sheets, handouts, as you've seen in the lobby. Please hold all questions to the end after the panel discussion, and we'll call for audience questions at that point. So we're here today to learn about wildfire prevention measures and about local groups working to better inform our community, including the Big Sky Fire Department, Fire Adapted Big Sky, and the Neighborhood Ambassador Program. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to offer a very special thanks to John Zirkle and the staff here at WAMPAC for the use of this incredible facility. If community is what brings us here, these folks at WAMPAC know how important that is. So thank you all for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker. John Trapp is an Air Force veteran who served as a captain in the U.S., Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. After active duty, Trapp earned a master's degree in conservation biology through the GI Bill. He worked on numerous state and federal, interestingly enough, very, very interesting to me, numerous state and federal wolf management programs in the Southwest and the Northern Rockies before becoming a firefighter-paramedic. This year will be his 19th wildland fire season, and he's currently the division chief of wildland fire at the Big Sky Fire Department. Trapp also heads the Seasonal Fuels Mitigation Program and serves on a national incident management team as a fire behavior analyst. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, John Trapp.
I have to know what's on the slide, I guess. I think I can do it, so let's see here. Let's start with, that one. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, look at that. All right, how's that? Thanks for having me here, and thanks for that introduction, Joe. It was very nice. So today, there's a lot of stuff as I was putting this together. Initially, I was going to speak twice, and then we boiled it down into once, and I'm like, then I had to put everything into my part and then boil it down further. So I'll try to stay on target here as best I can. There's a lot of different things to talk about, and other good speakers that will be covering things as well. All right, so I'll start off with this one. This is something that having watched fire for the last 18 years, is seeing the change in fire season, intensity, and size of wildfires as that continues to change dramatically compared to historic records of fire spread and fire activity in North America. So, and these things feed into each other, right? So it's kind of a cycle that's getting worse as we go. And not, as Joe mentioned, not to do the fear-mongering. You're all here because you probably already recognize that wildfire's a risk that we have to face, right? So not to like freak everyone out, but definitely we're in a situation where things are changing. We're seeing fire in places where we haven't seen it before. I was on a fire in California a few years ago in an area where there was no record of, it was on the coast, in Point Reyes National Seashore. Has anyone ever been there? There was an area there that had never burned. No record of any fire in this one area, and it was on fire, right? And so the fire managers, the biologists, the ecologists are all like, wow, I haven't seen that before. And how often do we hear that? A lot, right? We listen to the news, oh, in all my years fighting fire, I've never seen that before, right? We hear that over and over again, right? And so at some point we have to stop saying that and say, all right, how are we moving forward, right? And this is how we start in recognizing how these things are leading to increased fire activity. So how does fire spread? Is it like a wave that goes across the landscape? Because that's what we hear, you know, it was like a wave of fire. It was a wave of this. But fire, ground fire kind of moves in what you might consider a wave, right? It's moving from across the ground through the ground fuels, ignition to ignition, fuel source to fuel source. But it's not a wall of fire typically, because fire is putting embers aloft into the airstream, and a wind-driven fire is putting embers ahead of the fire, so substantially ahead of the fire at times, sometimes several miles ahead of the fire with flaming twigs and branches and pine cones raining down ahead of the fire. So that creates a series of spot fires ahead of the fire, and sometimes those spot fires, when they do ignite, they end up burning back towards the fire, because the fire that's approaching is being wind-driven or pushed, but it's also pulling in, it needs oxygen, and it's got a big source. So you see fire moving, it's a series of ignitions with new ignitions starting all over the place, and we'll talk a little bit about embers. All right, so do we think this? All right, so has anyone seen some of these studies that they've been doing to kind of look at how, a lot of times with, whether it's wolves or whether it's wildfire, a lot of times there's this idea of like, well, fire always does this, or wolves always do this or that. And it's not until you actually do research, right? Peer-reviewed research, that we can understand what's happening on the landscape. when I started with the wolf thing, all the wolf biologists said all the wolf dens always are south-facing. Well, after visiting 35 wolf dens, I found out that that wasn't actually the case, right? But any biologist back then, you asked at the time, and they would have said that. So this is similar. So they created these structures inside of a controlled environment, and have these ember generators with about a 15 to 20 mile an hour wind that's blowing these embers in towards the house. They had some different construction types. They had some hardy board. They had part of the roof that was asphalt. They had part of the roof that was cedar, like a cedar shake roof. As I mentioned, they put the vegetation right around the house. Everyone in here, I'm sure, knows that 0 to 5 feet from your house, right? There's supposed to have a lot of combustible stuff, right? No combustible stuff. So here in this case, they have some combustible stuff right up. It's not too, but I've seen sometimes the juniper or trees that are taking up half the space there. So you can see they had some leaf and needle litter in the gutters, and those embers accumulate in the gutters, and then the heat builds up, and then it starts to transition in and under the roof line. So we see fire spreading like this. Now, if you have something that's creating embers like that, the fire front, as we call it when we're fighting fire, is probably a pretty big area. It might be miles long, right, and staggered, and that whole area is generating embers. And they're producing, and they're blowing based on the wind into different areas. So that makes it incredibly challenging for firefighters to fight the fire that they're dealing with while also recognizing that there's going to be new fire starting everywhere a mile or two ahead of the fire front, right? So this just shows what happens over time. So a lot of these fires, they're called incipient. They're very small. They're kind of just smoldering around. And if literally you walked out of your house with a glass of water and threw it on it, they'd probably go out. That's the way a lot of them are. But once those structures do get involved and become fully involved, they become their own fuel source and their own heat production source, producing conductive heat, radiant heat, which is very detrimental if you have another structure within 30 feet of it. Okay, this is showing the embers coming in. They did have some mesh on the top, but a lot of times people use the screening that's made from plastic. That will melt, and then the embers will come in. So you want to make sure that you have the appropriate metal screening on your vents there and eaves. Here, someone left their window open. Now, and then, of course, the heat will then come through, and the embers will then blow into the house, and they'll land on something combustible like your couch or something that you have in the house, or your carpet, something that's going to get going. So, all right. So we can go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you for that excellent work up there in the booth. All right. Let me go to the next one. All right, so this is an example of, so this was the fire that was the Paradise Fire, another California fire, right? So if you look at that scale bar across the top, this is a satellite image, and that scale bar is showing a 10 miles of fire line there across the top. So it's a huge fire, and again, producing massive embers that are blowing downwind of that fire. So a lot of effects. Of course, if anyone has respiratory issues or things like that, right, this is a problem as well. But at the end of the day, the little triangle I put on the bottom says weather, fuels, and topography. And that is how wildfire spreads. 100%, all the time, every time. It's those things every time. And if you took the same conditions every time, the fire would be exactly the same every time. But our environment is very dynamic. It's not quite like that. But at the fire lab in Missoula, they're able to actually really control those factors and work with them in a different format. All right, there's another example of a fire. Okay, so how do we fight fire? We have this sort of thing, like, right, we have our hand crews, we have our air resources, and that's typically how we engage the fire. And sometimes it's more effective than others. Like, for instance, that bucket drop or that drop from that helicopter, probably not super effective with that much fire. Hard to do. The retardant drop across the top. So the difference is retardant slows the fire, doesn't extinguish it, it slows it. And the bucket drops are typically, or super scoopers, or water, which extinguishes it. Okay, so it was a really cool one from, I think, World War I, of like some surgeons trying to do triage in a war hospital, right? And so that's where that French came from, the French, the word triage. And it was like, okay, well, we only have so many doctors, but we have all these patients. How do we keep the most people alive, right? How do we save the most people? So that's what triage is, and the same thing happens with structures. As firefighters, we have to kind of make some of those same decisions. So in general, we look at two broad categories. Is the structure defensible or is it not? Okay, those are the two. And then from there, we can kind of boil it down into what our tactics are going to be. So these are pretty standard tactics. These tactics are used across the U.S., and they're standardized for a reason, so that when if I deploy to a fire, or Kendo deploys to a fire in California or wherever we're going, it's going to be a similar type of system. So here, like, right, would we call this one defensible or non-defensible? Well, it really depends, right? This time of year, like outside, and if with the snow and the rain, it might be really defensible, right? But in late August, not so much, right? And then also, do we have an entire like fire brigade that doesn't have anything else to do in one structure? Oh yeah, we can totally defend this thing, right? We'll come in with like 10 chainsaws and a dozer, and hoses and fire trucks, and we could defend it. But that's not the reality, right, for wildfire. So this one is another example where they've done more work. They've put non-combustible materials around the base of it and things like that to minimize the likelihood of structure ignition. Metal roof, well-treated wood. It is wood siding, but those large logs don't typically like to suddenly alight, right? If you held a match at a base of one of those, you'd be there all day and the thing probably wouldn't start, right? Okay. All right, here's another one. This one ended up having kind of a spot where the embers were able to get into the house. So, and once they get in, and you have the roof failure. So it had some concrete siding around the front, or concrete base, and it had a metal roof, but it also had some other weaknesses. It only takes one, right? One weakness that allows the embers to get into your house. So that's what we try to figure out when we are doing mitigation. So yeah, for some reason, yeah. This one is talking about how we use models to predict fire behavior on the landscape. So we could guess at it, and all firefighters that have been doing this for a while they're pretty good at it, right? Especially if they know the area. And but for me, I'm fairly new to Big Sky, but every year I go to new places and all over the U.S. to fight fires, and I have to start somewhere. Models are a good way to do it. Models can show us our weaknesses and areas that we need to focus on. So there's a lot to do that, to be able to do that and utilize that, and we are getting better with those technologies all the time, and this will be part of the work that I'm doing. It's part of the work that Chief Tetreault has been doing. So Big Sky is ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. So wildfire risk assessment. So this is something that the fire department offers, and I'll give you a link at the end here. But basically what we do is we come to meet you at your house, and we would do our walkthrough. There's lots of factors that we look at, like the siding, the roofing materials, the eaves, the vents, the decks, combustible materials around there, fuels, whether you have a coniferous forest or ladder fuels, there's a lot of them. And we evaluate all those factors and give you some ideas on like, okay, you could do these things to mitigate your risk from wildfire. Because we have to assume that no one's going to be at your house when the fire comes, right? We can't assume that there's going to be an engine at your house. That would be wrong. Now, some folks that have higher-end homes, they have insurance for their home to have an engine at their home. But even sometimes in those cases, there's not enough engines in those cases as well, right? So we have to go under the assumption that no one's going to be there. And so you have to do the work, and then you leave, and you hope that your trees and your house and everything is still there when you come back. So as part of this, in addition to doing things around your structure, we can do mitigation work. And so the Big Sky Fire Department has a seasonal fuel mitigation program. We're hiring 9 firefighters this year and sawyers to come and specifically do this. And we have, let's see, I have another. I threw this one in from the ecology background, right? So just here it shows a mix of low, moderate, and high intensity fire on the landscape. That's natural. That's what it's supposed to look like, right? But often we end up having these high intensity stand replacing fires that we're trying to mitigate. But when we do that mitigation work, I like to approach it from a perspective of how do we make this look if fire had been allowed to burn over the last 80 years, right? We have suppressed fire fairly well. Those early season fires, we'd get in there and knock them down and put them out over and over again, and that allowed for an unnatural accumulation of wildland fuels out there. Well, those early season fires are probably the ones we want to let actually burn around and do their work, right? They're going to reduce ground fuels. They might take out a few trees here or there, but we have gotten away from that, and we have to figure out how we can kind of get back in that approach. And we can do that through selective thinning as well, right? We can try to do what we think would happen to the landscape with fire with chainsaws. There's a good view. So you don't want to be. So these people actually stayed in their house during the fire, and they were actually making cookies for the firefighters, which they did. And there are firefighters, but there was that distance to the fully involved forest there is over 30 feet. So it was the radiant heat. That was kind of the magic number, is 30 feet. Through lots of research, it shows if you've got that less than 30 feet from your house is going to catch on fire most likely, right? But over 30 feet, and if you have some there, and there was a safety zone, and there was an engine able to be there, and that structure was able to survive. So as gnarly as it looks. I want to point you to the Big Sky Wildfire Hub. A lot of good information on there, and I'll give you I'm going to give you a QR code here for that as well, but it's got lots of good stuff. One of the things that Joe mentioned was this 96%, right, high risk. There's lots of different way that satellite imagery is being utilized to figure out what our risk is. The Big Sky community has an extremely high risk, right? Luckily, because of the altitude and the health of the forest, the season of high risk is fairly small, right? Because we typically have good snowpack, we typically have good green up, right? When the trees are greening up, they're not as likely to catch on fire, right? So there's some good factors in the Big Sky, but still it will come. There will be fire, and so if we do stuff ahead of time, we can do a better job at dealing with it. So, all right, so those are the top QR code is for the Big Sky Fire Hub. The right QR code over there is to request a wildfire risk assessment. So you can do that one, and we'll get on our calendar to come and visit and do an assessment of your place, and we can talk about. So there was another slide in there I had about grants. I'm not sure where that one went. But yeah, there's federal grant funding, which has been unfrozen. We all heard how it got frozen for a while, right? It's been unfrozen, so we do have some grant funding to help offset the cost of the crew. But really, the high priority for me when it comes to using grant funds is it's best to utilize those when we're utilizing them as a community or as with our neighbors or within your HOA, right? Because if you're able to do work within an HOA and your neighbors are doing the same work you are on, that's, to me, worth, putting more money towards that. So I really encourage that. I know Mel's going to talk a little bit about what that looks like as well. But working together is how we're going to have the best impact to reduce the risk of wildfire. All right. Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, John. That was very well done. And intrepid to jump between the slides like that. You got some flexibility. That's good. Jeff Cadry hails from Minnesota and has been in Big Sky for the past 15 years. He and I are actually Hidden Village neighbors, which is good to know that a guy with this caliber of experience is not too far away. So you can text me first if anything happens. Cadry earned his bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. All right, good. And a master's degree in forest sciences from Colorado State University. He currently works for Lone Mountain Land Company as its environmental manager, where he manages forestry, noxious weeds, and wildlife outreach. He's been managing forests in the Big Sky area for the past 11 years. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeff Cadry.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that intro, Joe. It's very kind. And yeah, thank you all for showing up. Excited to talk trees with my community here. Something I can talk on for days. But I had to titrate it down to 10 minutes, so bear with me, and got a lot to cover, but excited to talk. So yeah, here's my roadmap. You'll notice that forest management was the title of my talk, but it's going to be the last thing we're going to talk about. So we're going to start with the trees that we have here in Big Sky, a little bit about some characteristics that really influence how they interact on our landscape, get into a little bit about disturbance regimes that we currently have on our landscape, and then get into forest management, how we can take all of those 4 concepts and apply them into managing our trees. So, okay, perfect. So, these are our 7 tree species, our main players in our forest here. Southwest Montana, we're not very diverse in terms of tree species. Tree identification is actually pretty easy around here. So starting out with our lone deciduous tree on the landscape, aspens. We don't have a huge aspen population, but they're here and there, and where we do have them, they're definitely worth keeping around. Getting into our conifers, our softwoods, evergreens, we have six species on the landscape. There we go. Cool. So we can break these conifers down even further. Starting up with those first 3 species are our pines. A pine tree, by definition, is trees that have multiple needles that connect at the same point on a branch. So we can break those 3 pines down even further. We have 1 2-needle pine in the landscape, so if you find a tree that only has 2 needles where it connects to the branch, it's a lodgepole pine. We have 2 5-needle pines native to our Big Sky area. We have limber pine down here in the canyon, pretty prevalent. You're out hiking in Porcupine, there are some beautiful limber pines in that area. Whitebark pine, on the other hand, is a higher elevation species. We don't see it coming into the game until we get to about 8,000 feet. These are general rules. There are always exceptions. But whitebark pine is struggling right now. It's currently listed as a threatened species on the Endangered Species Act. That's relatively new. Got hit really hard in the last mountain pine beetle outbreak. So in the early 2000s here And then a non-native fungal pathogen known as white pine blister rust is really creating some havoc. So limber pine, white bark pine, if you have them on the landscape, on your property, really worthwhile trees to keep around and promote. The other type of conifers that we can classify are spruce and fir. So we have 3 of these species, and they're more of your iconic Christmas tree growth, and they have one needle where they connect to the branch. Okay, so an important characteristic that really dictates where these trees occur and how they occur on their landscape is shade tolerance. So this is a spectrum where we have light-demanding trees. These are typically our pioneering species after a disturbance, after a big wildfire. These are the first players in the game. They thrive in that high light environment. As we go down that arrow, we get more into the shade tolerance. These are the trees that come in after those pioneering species get up high enough. There's shade in the understory, and when these trees are young, they really can do pretty well with not a lot of light. So, taking that concept and now applying it to something I like to refer to as forest succession. So this cartoon here is just to illustrate the phases that our forests go through over hundreds of years. We'll start with old growth there on your left. Old growth, I think, is a very subjective term. It really depends on who you're talking to and where you're at in terms of how old is old growth. For our area, I like to say 200 plus years is an old growth forest, but that differs geographically. So old growth forests, these trees have been on the landscape for a while, trees have died, fuels have accumulated. Eventually, a disturbance comes along. In this cartoon here, we have fire, but it doesn't always have to be fire, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But after that disturbance, we get a blank canvas, essentially. And that's where we get those pioneering species. Typically here, it's lodgepole pine. And a big reason, especially after fire, that we get lodgepole pine establishment is we have serotinous cones in lodgepole. Not all of their cones are serotinous, but a lot of them can be. And serotinous just means that these cones take extreme heat to open up and release their seeds. So typically that's wildfire. So these pioneering species, they come onto our landscape, they start growing, they start competing with each other. And so they're all fighting for the light, the soil, nutrients, and water. As they continue to compete, you have winners, you have losers, they get taller. Now we start getting into this intermediate state where we have those shade-tolerant species that start to establish in the understory. And they start growing, and they start taking up those gaps of those loser, lodgepole pines. And as we continue to progress through that intermediate phase, those shade-tolerant trees grow up, and they start to become part of the overstory, and we start to get more of a diversity of our trees on our landscape. As time progresses, we get into that old growth phase. We start getting, insects and disease that comes on, trees that just age out. They get too old, they fall over. Here in the greater Yellowstone, we have very low decomposition rates, mostly driven by the lack of moisture. And so those trees that fall over, they just sit on the forest floor and they continue to accumulate. And so our fuels, as we get into that old growth stage, they continue to accumulate and they continue to build. And this really kind of builds off of what John was saying about fire suppression. We've been stopping fires for over 100 years now, and that's really played a role in the amount of fuel that accumulates in our forests. But like I said, fire is not the only thing that, only disturbance in our forests. Other things really locally here are logging. Logging is a big reason why this community started in the first place. Big logging boom in the early 1900s. That was really the push up the canyon and up into the meadow. And then another big boom in the 1980s, huge boom in the 1980s. A lot of our infrastructure, especially as you're getting up towards Yellowstone Club, up over into Moonlight, the Big Sky Resort, a lot of that was done by Plum Creek in the 1980s, and that's a lot of our road systems today, are just old logging roads. Insects and disease also has had a big impact. I had mentioned mountain pine beetle, native bug, comes in outbreaks roughly every 30 to 40 years. We had a big one in the early 2000s. We'll most likely have another one in 20 years from now. So something to think about. Forest management can help promote healthy trees that could actually potentially defend themselves against this beetle. Other insects and disease, spruce budworm, Big Sky is a big hotspot in the state of Montana for spruce budworm. We see quite a bit of activity. It kind of ebbs and flows in certain years, but you'll see it on the landscape. Dwarf mistletoe, another one, commander rust. We have a handful of diseases that the more you kind of look at your trees, the more you'll probably notice some of these diseases around. And then development. A lot of times I think of development as homes on the landscape, but it's so much more than that. It's our ski runs, our chairlifts, our utility lines that run through. This all has an impact on our forests. Development and logging, they can kind of mimic fire, right? When we develop areas, we typically clear all of the trees. That has an effect on the fuel load, but it also has an effect on this wildland urban interface concept that we've been talking about. We're now expanding further and further, and we're making just this fire situation more complex, especially in terms of fuels. And then changing climate. We're seeing hotter, drier, longer fire seasons, and what we historically have seen on the landscape is definitely not the case than what we're going to see in the future. So these factors all really affect how we can manage our forests and that opportunity. So forest management, you're on your property and now you're kind of thinking, I should do something with my trees. The first question you should ask yourself are, what are your objectives? What are you really trying to do? And that may change in different areas of your landscape, but especially around your home, that first one, altering fire behavior, is something that's going to be probably your first or second objective. But you want to think about all of these things, and then if you have multiple objectives, really ranking those objectives. What's the main driver here? The next question to ask yourself is, what's on the landscape? What do we have? What are the species present? Density, age, what disturbances? Maybe your property's been logged before. Where is your forest at on that forest succession spectrum? And then applying that on the landscape. So this is similar to what John had up in those zones, a little bit different, but that first 5 feet we talked about, no fuels, no trees should be in that area. Next, getting into that 5 to 30 range and really just thinking about this maybe as fully dense forest, and how do we cut our trees or manage our trees to promote that crown spacing of 18 feet or more. Really, the more the better, especially in that first zone. It's also a zone we like to plant ornamentals. So if we are planting landscaping trees, really consider deciduous trees. They're a lot more fire resistant. Aspens are the one native that we have, and they do pretty well when we plant them. But really, if you imagine this whole picture as trees, and there's hundreds of thousands of trees potentially in your landscape, you can cut that forest in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of different ways. So which trees do you keep? Which ones do you cut? And I think one big concept to really think about is diversity. Diversity of your tree species and diversity of your age classes. That really bodes well for trees that are better set up for insects and disease. And also thinking about our changing climate. We don't really know what our forests are going to look like 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 100 years from now. These weather patterns might be favoring different tree species, and those 7 trees, they might look a little different on the landscape in 100 years. So the more diversity we can have, the better on that front. And then also 5-needle pines, just got to put another plug. If you have a 5-needle pine, they're really worthwhile promoting. So whether that's limber down here in the lower elevations or white bark pine in the upper. And then I just I'm going to round out this with a couple before and after pictures of what forestry work can really look like on the landscape. It doesn't have to be a moonscape. I think a lot of times you talk about thinning or cutting trees, you think of this like clear-cut section out on the mountainside, but it really you can still have trees, and those trees that are left on the landscape in these after photos, they're going to have more resources. They have more light, they have more water, they have more nutrients, and they can hopefully better fight off insects disease and also wildfire. When they have more resources, more water available, they're more resistant to torching and burning. So, yeah, thanks for coming with.
Good work. Thanks. Thank you, Jeff. That was terrific. Nicely done. These things are always tricky. Mel Crighton told me his last name is pronounced like fightin'. He's a retired professional engineer, 40 years, Habitat for Humanity job boss for 25, and a ski instructor of 35 years. This is a quote from him here, "You can say that once I start something, I probably stay too long." Crighton now works on invasive species and was honored with the Gallatin County Weed Warrior Award. He serves on the Rotary Club Service Committee and is a coordinator for Fire Adapted Big Sky's Neighborhood Ambassador Program. He's owned a home in Big Sky for 15 years. Please give a warm welcome to Mel "Fightin' Crighton.
Howdy. Can you hear me all right? Great. Yep. Nobody told me how this works. So anyway, the introduction says enough. If you need to contact me about anything, there's my email address. Take a picture of it right now, because it's going. Okay. What is Fire Adapted Big Sky? That's an organization we put together. Fire Adapted means that we are ready to evacuate, we can deal with smoke, and we have hardened our homes and property against fire, against wildfire. So 2 of those topics we're going to deal with in June, right before wildfire season starts, but we're going to talk about hardening right now because it requires a lot of time, a lot of planning, and sometimes a lot of money. So we want to get you on a head start to that, because if you're going to hire one of these contractors out here, you want to get on their books early. So a quick overview of what this means. Of what I'm going to do is Neighborhood Ambassadors, the Wildfire Action Guide, which was available to all of you at the check-in, what home hardening requires, selecting a contractor, which really we won't go into too much detail with because they're going to tell you why they're the best, and Firewise landscaping and where to learn more. So if you want to be a neighborhood ambassador, it's a great job. The pay is $0, but you get to wear one of those neat blue t-shirts. So, but you want to be somebody who cares. We've got everybody who's now an ambassador is active in their community. They know a lot of neighbors. They know who to talk to get things done. You can go to them if you need to ask a question about what do I do about these trees, or what do I do about evacuation plans. They've got a wealth of information at hand. And they should be working with your HOA on landscaping and wildfire issues. I know that Jeff is very heavily involved up at Hidden Village, and that's what we want to see in every HOA. But unfortunately, we have a whole lot more HOAs than we have ambassadors. And of course, we want to be, our ambassadors are all tied to the fire department. We work for John Trapp. He pays us well. And through there, we're linked to the Greater Yellowstone Fire Action Network. So right now we have 11 HOAs represented by neighborhood ambassadors who have been briefed and know what they're doing. We've got 3 more coming on board in 3 more areas, but we've got 80 HOAs here. So there's no way we're going to get to everybody before the next fire season. So what we want to do as a neighborhood ambassador is get you guys ready. We can't do it one-on-one. We're going to have these big meetings or online presentations. We're going to have articles in Explore Big Sky starting next month on what you can do to harden your home or prepare to evacuate. And we're setting up a website and a Facebook site right now so that you can go get data and you can ask questions about any wildfire topic. And the Big Sky Wildfire Action Guide, which you have copies of, has 2 QR codes on the back. One of them is to sign up for the county evacuation system, if you do nothing else, click on that QR code. Because if a fire comes, you're going to get a phone call telling you what's going on and where it's going to be and whether it affects you personally or not. Also, we've got checklists for evacuation. That's great. We're going to cover those more in June. But it's got the basics of home hardening, and I've got a lot of good stuff in there, and it just gets you curious enough to go look for more. So make sure you look at those QR codes. The other QR code takes you straight to the wildfire site that John mentioned. And from the site, if you just go cruising through there, you're going to see a whole bunch of headers that you can click on. And each of those takes you to a different resource, whether it's evacuation or smoke, dealing with smoke, or landscaping issues, or home construction issues. So the old wildfire triangle that John alluded to, we can't do much about weather and topography. Our houses are where they are. The weather is what it is. But we can certainly do something about the fuels. So that's what this home hardening is about. There's a diagram in the guide, and you'll see this in a lot of places. The 5-foot zone, anyway, the 5-foot zone where nothing flammable exists, except your house itself. But we want to keep all other flames away from the house, and by keeping, that's where the embers are going to settle. Zone out up to 30 feet, as both guys mentioned, we want to have vegetation, but we want to have it spread out far enough that if it burns, other vegetation somewhere else doesn't burn. This is where usually the ground fires stop. So the fire is coming in as a wave on the ground, which is kind of improbable. It'll stop there. And then on the outside, the up to 100 feet, you basically have taken away as much fuel as you can to minimize what burns out there. So your wood piles, I don't want to ask how many people have wood piles right up against their house because I don't want to see any hands, but I know it happens. And wood piles should be at least 30 feet from the house because when embers come through, wood pile is going to burn. And if it's close to the house is going to burn. Right now, the statistic is that somewhere between 80 and 90% of home fires in a wildfire don't burn from the fire coming through in the tree crowns. They don't burn from the ground fire coming in. It's from embers that land from maybe a mile or two away. If you remember the Bridger Canyon fire a few years back, one of the houses that burned wasn't anywhere near the fire. So we want to keep embers at bay. Now, what about the house? Well, obviously, a Class A roof is either metal or Class A shingles. They won't burn. If you've got a little pile of pine needles on the roof and it's Class A, don't fret. It's not going to be the source of fire. It's the pine needles in the gutter that are going to get you. Because once the gutter needles catch fire, the fire goes up under the roof, and boom, now you've got a fire inside the house. So the exterior wall itself should not go all the way down to the ground with flammable material. Lots of houses have a concrete or usually a concrete foundation showing right at the base of the siding. Best, it's a minimum 6 inches, better to have a foot, just to keep any embers that might collect under there from catching the siding on fire. The wood decks and porches are probably going to be our biggest culprits because they can burn, obviously, and anything underneath them can burn. So you can put screen around it, but that's a lot of screening, and you really don't want all that. If your deck's 8 feet off the ground, it's going to look kind of funny. But firewood piles, as I mentioned, gutters, they should be metal and not plastic, because plastic gutters will melt. Attic vents screened at 1/8 inch, and as John showed, stuff can get in at 1/8 inch, but if you don't have anything flammable in your attic, if it's just fiberglass insulation, you're okay. It won't burn. Double glazed windows are good because if you have a fire and heat breaks the outside glass, you've still got the inside glass to keep embers out. Because once embers get into your house, there goes the couch, there goes the curtains, there goes everything. Siding material is not so critical if you've taken a lot of other precautions, but if you're just building or you're re-siding, use something non-flammable like hardy plank. And deck furniture and cushions, hey, we all like our teak furniture and we like those fluffy, plump cushions, I'll say it. But if you've been told to evacuate, get that stuff inside the house. So this is cheap. This is sheet metal applied right over the bottom row of siding so that if embers collect in here, nothing catches fire. And really, this is like you're asking for it, you know. This is going to happen. Fortunately, the house is brick, but it's under the deck. So the deck's going to burn. So how do you know what to do? Well, first off, ask for a fire department inspection and appraisal. They do not share them with anybody but you. And they've got a fuels crew, and they have grants to help you with the cost if you get in early. But the last few years, the grant money has disappeared quick, and the fuels crew has been booked all summer long. So if you're going to do it now. Once you do it, once you know what to do, you can do it yourself or you can hire a contractor. And the slash is what's left when you're done clearing all that crap out and you got a big pile and you say, well, heck, this is big sky. I can't burn it, so now what am I going to do? That's one reason to hire a contractor. He'll take care of it for you. But you can do things with it. If you're in an HOA and you've got access to a chipper, you can chip it up, leave it right there on the ground as long as it's not too thick, and next spring, it's gone.
Big Sky Fire will have their chipper again this summer.
Oh, is it running now? Yeah, last year it was broken all summer long. So, but they've got a chipper, and they'll rent it to the HOAs. So anyway, there's a sheet of paper out there about contractors, hiring a contractor. If you're going to hire a contractor, ask yourself some questions first, like how big is the job, what's my timeline, things like that before you make a call. And then the second list of questions is what you should ask the contractor regarding capabilities and insurance and liabilities. Because if you got an $8 million house and he's got $400,000 worth of insurance, you might want to talk to a different contractor. Okay, so if you got a small property, you can do it yourself. And you see how we spell saws? Because that's what they are. I decided I was going to do it myself, and I don't know how many thousands of dollars I've got wrapped up in chainsaws and pole saws and pruning saws and all kinds of other crap, and I'm still not done. Safety goggles, gardening tools, some place to get rid of slash. Your HOA may all get together and hire a chipper for a day. That would be super. And the last, most important tool is the telephone when you finally give up and you say, I'm going to hire somebody. These are some after photos. JJ might recognize these. This is her lot. It was done 2 summers ago, I believe. And it looks pretty good. You know, you can't tell that it really doesn't look that bad. Here's where Alpenscapes can help. It's an organization that's made up of 4 different organizations over here on the right. And over here is all of Fire Adapted Big Sky. And there's fire department, sheriff, the emergency management, DNRC, Yellowstone Fire Department. We've got all of these folks involved in some way or another with Fire Adapted Big Sky, but only 4 over here dealing with Alpenscapes, which is more than just fire. It's also water, invasive species, and ecology. And we overlap right here in the red areas. And if you see right there on the home hardening, when we start taking out plants and trees, what are you going to put back in the empty space, if anything? So Firewise Landscaping, there's a ton of information on the Alpenscapes site. They're simple. URL is alpenscapes.org. And as Jeff mentioned, some trees are very fire resistant and can do a good job in close. This is a house that's been hardened. You can see the hardscaping. The big trees are way out there. No flammables on the porch. Alpenscapes on April 16th is having a Firewise landscaping seminar for 3 hours to talk about all the aspects of the landscaping. It costs us $10. There's a QR code that's also out in the lobby and at the Wilson. But how do you know? Okay, the bottom line is the Big Sky Owners Association is working on a simplified process so you don't have to file for modification to do mitigation work on your property. So it'll basically just be tell them what you're doing. If it fits in a certain range of projects, nothing else required. You may have to sit down with somebody and explain if it's a big job, but that's about it. What'll it do to your home insurance rates? Nobody here has a home insurance problem, but some people can't get it, and some people are seeing outrageous prices. 2 bills in the Montana legislature going right now. Both came out of the House. Both are now in the Senate. One of them will offer or allow insurance companies to offer discounts or rebates if you do fire hardening. The other one will, if they come out and evaluate your house, which means they can't just set your rate based on zip code, that they have to give you what your score is and tell you where you've got a problem. So both of them, especially the first one, looks like it's going to pass very easily. So let's hope this happens. Okay, and that's it. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Mel. Liz Davy had a 40-year career with the Forest Service as a forester, as a silviculturist,
That's what Jeff is.
which I had to look up.
Forest ecologist.
Yes, growing and cultivation of trees. Huh? A fuel specialist and a district ranger. She's lived and worked in the greater Yellowstone area for more than 40 years. Davy loves to ski, bike, hike, backpack, and is passionate about this ecosystem in our communities, which we definitely appreciate. She lives in Driggs, Idaho, with her husband and 2 dogs, and is currently project coordinator with the Greater Yellowstone Fire Action Network. Please welcome Liz Davy.
Thanks for letting me come here. There we go. I'm never tall enough for these things anyways. I did invite myself, and I'm really happy that you all accepted that I could come and chat with you. We formed the Greater Yellowstone Fire Action Network when I retired in about 2022. And the whole premise behind that is to bring people together who are working and addressing the issues or the challenges that communities and the landscape has with wildfire or lack thereof, meaning lack of wildfire. You've heard from great experts tonight that this landscape benefits greatly from wildfire and from fire, and it needs it. Any of you who were here in 1988 knows it's not the end of the world, and it needs it. I was on my first fire in 1983, so that'll tell you how old I am. So we created this network to not just to have another, paid staff and people working together, but to share. There's limited money, there's limited capacity, there's limited information, and to share. We realize that a lot of people were working together or working. You've heard the word community 100 times already tonight. It takes a community to do this kind of work. If you do it by yourself, good for you, but get the community involved, and you are. Mel is a great example of that, and getting you all to be neighborhood ambassadors and promoting it. You are so fortunate to have John here. He has great experience, and Jeff is an amazing ecologist. So use and abuse these folks and make sure they're helping you. But it takes a community to work together. We wanted to pull people together so that we're not reinventing the wheel, we're not doing the same thing in 5 or 8 different places, that we're sharing and trying to be effective and efficient. This is who we are. We're practitioners of wildfire mitigation. We share that information, not only just amongst homeowners, but with agencies, people who are working on this as a living, and with different folks, collaborative groups. Big Sky, Fire Adapted Big Sky is a collaborative group, as there are like probably 8 or more of those across the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Fire agencies from fire departments on up to federal governments. We are also part of a larger network, the Fire Learning Network and the Fire Adapted Community Learning Network in the nation. So like if someone sends me a question and says, I want to know something about it and I don't know anything about it, I contact other people. And that's just putting people in touch with others, is just the whole premise and the whole reason why we're doing stuff. I have one more? Yeah. So we actually formalized the network. The 3 of us who started this network are like, we don't want a formal network. We don't want a mission. We don't want a vision. We just want to get stuff done. But we formalized the network because we have to be slightly organized. So last year in Bozeman at our workshop, we have an annual workshop in the fall. At our workshop, we formed these various action groups based on what our network members wanted. We got to have someone driving the ship, so the steering committee, they're responsible for financing it, hence I'm only funded part-time and I don't make very much money, which is fine, because I'm retired. Communications, we have a communications group, and we've hired a communications specialist, and where she's working right now, her name is Christine Landis, and she lives in Myrna, Wyoming. If you know where that is, I should buy you a drink. She is working on a 5-year communications plan because we realized, and everyone said, communication, I don't know who my neighbors are, I don't know who my surrounding communities are who are doing things, and consistent messaging is really, really important. So we're doing that. Workforce capacity, you guys have an 11-person crew, you're the only community in the ecosystem that has that. The Forest Service used to have that, not anymore, unfortunately. Hence, they need to rely on our partners, us, all of us, to help them get the work done as well as doing the work in your community. The Neighborhood Ambassador Program, one of the most successful programs across the country because it's peer-to-peer. If you know Mel, he's fun. You want to go and talk to him, and you want him to tell you about what he's doing on his property or what he did do or what you can do. And you are more likely to talk to your neighbor than you are to talk to someone who comes in a green Forest Service uniform, maybe even than the fire department, because they're busy like putting out house fires and stuff. So neighbor to neighbor and working together is really, really important. Our biggest program, I guess it's a program, is our smoke-ready communities. We've worked with now 7 communities developing a smoke-ready plan, and we worked with Grand Teton National Park to develop a smoke plan to address smoke issues not only for their employees who work outside like all the time, but for visitors. I can't see the Tetons. Where am I gonna see the Tetons? That's huge, right? People, it's their bucket list. So we worked on messaging and working with them to develop a smoke-ready plan so that we can't clear the smoke so they can see the Tetons, but we could provide another experience for them and provide that. That's basically who we are and what we're doing. Come talk to me out at the table. Smoke, ready for a smoke event is really, really important. You may not feel like you're impacted by smoke because you're outside all the time and okay, you know, your eyes are watering and your nose is snotting and stuff, but other people, just the hint of smoke in the air and they are incapacitated. And so knowing what to do and being ready, it's just like doing that fuels reduction around your home, that home hardening, being ready for a smoke event. Probably the biggest complaint during a wildfire or a prescribed burn is not that you see flames in the air, although it might be if it's right behind your house, is smoke. People, it can come from hundreds of miles. Canada, what was that, 2 years ago? It all came from Canada. When everybody, New Yorkers, were calling our smoke specialists and going, what is this? What do we do with this? And she's Jill McMurray, and she's over on the Bridger Teton, and she's like telling them how to deal with poor air quality. They had no idea. That's what a smoke-ready plan is all about. Come visit me at my table, and we'll go from there. I'll go back. Thank you.
All right, nice work, Liz. That was super informative. You'd think New York would know how to deal with poor air quality, but maybe. Well, again, thanks everybody for coming. This is a terrific group of super informed individuals, and I'm, proud to be up here with each of them. You may notice we have a special guest here with us this evening. Matt Kendziorski is a firefighter-paramedic and acting captain with the Big Sky Fire Department. In January, he and 5 of his firefighting colleagues went down to fight the devastating fires in Los Angeles. And Kendziorski went down as the strike team leader in training. Let's give it up for Matty K. Kendziorski. Matt, let's start with you, actually. So you went down to LA to help with the firefighting efforts in early January, pretty soon after the fires started. I think you said the 11th?
Yeah.
Yeah. And these fires, I mean, they were brutal. You all know. They killed 29 people. They destroyed 18,000 structures. Were you surprised? First off, were you surprised by the call to go down there?
100%. The Santa Ana winds and the weather conditions that California usually happens in October, way earlier in the season than it happened this year, which had happened in January. And I mean, the reason we got to go is because it was such a surprising event, across the country. Most of the wildfires are doing their winter rest time or winter job.
Yeah.
So it was pretty surprising that we got the call to go.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the first things I thought of was just, what the hell are these guys going to do? Half the the National Wildland firefighters are ski patrolling right now. Well, so tell me about that experience and what struck you most about when you guys were deployed down there.
What struck me most?
Yeah. What like you guys get called down. You go down the 11th. Tell me about the sort of the way things unfolded. I've worked with Cal Fire in the past, and sometimes those guys are really good, and but it sounded like they were really well prepared and had a good plan for these fires that are like a wildfire in a city. I mean, who thinks of that, right?
100%. So we got there, we got the call, and we were there from the call in about 2.5 days. So we got out there in about 2.5 days, which is pretty. So there were 2 strike teams from Montana of 5 engines each. So there were 5 Type 1 engines and 5 Type 3 engines. Strike team is 5 engines. So for us to all get together, we got together in an afternoon, and by noon the next day, we were assembled in Rocker, all gathered and ready, and then we started heading down there. And we got down there, drove the rest of that day, and then the next night we got down there. And it was really great. We got tons of support. People were waving at us, cheering at us the whole way down. I mean, it was great. So we get to Beaumont, Noble Park in Beaumont, California, and we roll in the middle of the night. And like I said, this fire had started a week ago, and they have these pre-positioned places to have their mobile centers. So there was already this camp and this mobile center already set up for us to check in, get inspected, and get fed, trailers to sleep in. It was amazing. And the support was great. They were so happy we were there. They got us checked in, gave us everything we needed. We got to put water in our engines because it's cold here. So we kind of had to leave without our water, because driving fire engines with water in them in below zero weather for hours and hours is not good for the engines at all. So we had them empty, showed us where to get water, gave us all the support we needed, got us where to go, and they were pretty dialed. It was a really great experience.
Well, I'm glad that you guys got that chance, and such a honor to have them call you guys and get you down there as in a staging capacity. Talking about that staging capacity, you guys didn't necessarily you didn't have to go to work, really. I mean, you had to work, but you didn't have to go fight some of those fires.
We were not on the 2 big fires. Mm-hmm. We got put onto what's called an initial attack team. So when we got to staging really early, there were not a lot of resources there. And we watched them build up as days went on, but we got pulled aside and we got put on what was called an initial attack team. And so we had 3 strike teams, so that's 15 engines. And there were actually 10 engines and 5 tenders backing us up. And we sat in a group, and we had to have a 3-minute response time during the day and then a 20-minute response time at night. And we were all together all the time and had our phones by us and were ready to go. And they moved us around and pre-positioned us in different places because these Santa Ana winds were going on. And like, think of the windiest day in Big Sky when you're up on the peak. This is happening during the day through the cities. And they were crazy.
How does that work? I mean, you may not have fought the fires specifically, yourselves. You were ready to do it, but what is different from fighting a fire in L.A. in a city versus Montana, for example?
Well, I mean, there's a ton of homes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the big one. But their preparedness level, I mean, like us having this conversation today and the ones that go on in the state and looking at them, the difference is, I mean, we got to go to the initial attack airbase to see how they work. So when a wildfire goes in their area at this airbase, they get paged at the same time, the air resources get paged at the same time as the engines. And the air resources fly up and can guide the engines in. Be like, hey, I see you. You're over here, think about maybe taking this right because this is going to be your better place to anchor your fire and to start thinking about this. And so they have these things that are set up, and it was really cool to see because when we get the page for a wildland fire, we're going to be there first and getting that thought of being like, okay, we need to get up air resources early, where, contacting the Forest Service and contacting the right contacts to start getting some things up going our way. Seeing how they all had it all pre-planned was a big learning experience for me.
Yeah, that's incredible to be able to, move all those chess pieces all over the place, and there were a lot of them. Well, I wanted to shift over to you, Liz. Tell us just a little bit more about the wildland-urban interface. When we're talking about, Los Angeles fires, we're talking about Big Sky, which is squarely in the WUI. Talk a little bit more about wildland-urban interface and our situation.
So when I moved west, there was no such thing as a wildland-urban interface. Remember, I'm old. 40 years ago, I moved to Driggs, Idaho, and no one lived in the woods. Everyone lived in the farm fields or, little houses or the communities or the cities. Well, as people have moved west, because we all moved here if you weren't born here, there are reasons why people moved here. They wanted to build in similar places, or they were able to. Built roads up into the woods and were able to build in there. That's the wildland-urban interface, where people who have constructed things of value, homes, cell towers, water developments, like for community water systems, when they have built those into the forest and adjacent to public lands, that's the wildland-urban interface. But now we're seeing things like LA going. It was a wildfire. It was probably near one, but it was caused by probably a natural cause. It wasn't home fires igniting. You heard about the tar sands fires up in Canada. I mean, that was unreal. it burned everything. So it's the wildland urban interface is where homes and things of value meet the forest or the public lands, Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, state lands, things like that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great description. Well, so John, I was hoping you could talk a little about the Wildland Urban Interface Code, the WUI code. What's that about? And yeah, just could you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so there's a thing called the International Fire Code, and those that go to places and stay in hotels and go out to eat and notice that there's like sprinklers, and when we look around here, there's these exit signs up, and there's these things that help improve our safety. You have to have the right number of exits in a place like this where you have people in case there's a fire. All those codes were derived from like vast majority from fatalities, people that died because those things were not met, and they change, and that's why they're in the fire code now. Well, the WUI code is a version of this focus on the wildland urban interface. It gives guidance on how structures that are built in the WUI, what kind of construction they should be and what kind of materials, and how to mitigate risk from wildland fire. Some places adopt those codes just like we adopt fire codes. Montana is a little less likely to do that. You know, in Montana, we don't like to be told what we have to do, right? So, and other places have adopted more of the WUI code broadly. Of course, when you look at it, the WUI code, there's things that are related to money and costs, right? Things are often there's a financial component related to it, but these WUI codes have great advice on how to mitigate and minimize loss from wildland fire, and there's good components in it. And some places and municipalities or counties or even HOAs like to take pieces of that WUI code and incorporate it where they can. So if you look online and see the WUI code, you might notice that depending on your HOA, there might be some very similar types of guidance in there. So I think that we as a state and as a nation, especially as we see fire spreading in places in the East Coast and areas that there hasn't really been fire, we need to recognize that those codes need to be taken just as seriously as the structure fire codes.
Yeah, well, that's a great description, and yeah, you're referring to the South Carolina, fires right now, and yeah, it's pretty wild stuff we're seeing. I think what I've heard a lot of folks refer to in the fire world is fire season is now 12 months long. Well, Jeff, I was just going to go to you. The WUI code covers existing infrastructure, from what I can best understand. What about infrastructure that doesn't exist yet? 97% of all wildfires, intentional or not, are human caused. So, with more homes, mathematically, and more people in the WUI could potentially mean more wildfires. With no, municipal government in Big Sky, we look to the state and the county. What planning and zoning codes exist that can regulate the amount and location of homes built in the wildland urban interface?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think here in Big Sky, the biggest thing is our fire department. Whenever we submit a plan to put in a new subdivision, we have to get approval from the fire department to be able to get coverage. And so that's our biggest fail-safe. They come in, they inspect all of our plans, what we're proposing to do, and then if they don't feel comfortable with that area, they can deny that process. So that's our biggest enforcement, our biggest way to really build to the WUI code and build smarter. Another thing that we're working on, Lemont Land Company, is trying to get the horse in front of the cart. So this is coming from the forestry side of it. You know, a lot of times what's happened in the past is we go in and we clear the lot and then build the home, build the structure, and then say, now we should do some tree thinning. And then that's so much harder. All this infrastructure is in place. You can't use a masticator because it might blow chips through a window, things like that. So one push that we're working on is to do more of our fuel management before we start going vertical on any project. And so we're building defensible space into these areas. And then on the other side, we're trying to build smarter using these building materials that are recommended in the WUI code. We don't technically have to follow that, but obviously it's smart. We're building in an area that it's not if we're going to see a wildfire, it's when.
Add one thing,
Yeah,
I'll
please
jump
do.
on that Jeff said about, and just in our last legislative, our current legislative period that we're in, a legislator introduced a bill to remove fire department review from building plans, right? So, and the rationale was, not great. I'll just say that, but I think it's important that we have to stay alert to what's happening. And Mel mentioned a couple of the House bills that we're going through to reduce the cost of insurance. Prior to that being accepted, the actual the statute in Montana didn't allow insurance companies to give a discount, even if you did the work. So we're making progress in some areas, but you got to keep your eye on the back door too, because they're doing stuff like that in other areas where they're trying to reduce the safety, often for financial outcome.
Well, that does seem like a bit of a backwards notion to me in terms of, but putting the dollar in front of the cost of a home or a person. Yeah, putting the dollar in front of the cart in front of the horse. Yeah. Well, that kind of brings me to you, Mel. You were talking a little about BSOA and HOAs, but how does the propensity for wildfire in Big Sky affect homeowners, or can affect homeowners' insurance rates?
Well, right now, actually, I got nothing on that. But no, right now,
Oh, you will.
there are folks in some neighborhoods who cannot get insurance, or their insurance has gone sky high. We're all going to see it. Even the folks who live down in the meadow are going to have to start paying higher insurance because of the risk on the other side, up the hill. And even the meadow isn't safe from wildfire. Like I said, embers can travel. So there's a risk here that everybody could have a fire. And because of that, the insurance companies are saying, we've got to cover that risk. And you heard how much they've lost in California alone. And to the point where some companies have pulled out of California. Well, they haven't pulled out of Montana yet, but some are on the edge. And we don't want that to happen. But the HOAs especially can help, because if you promote an atmosphere of fire safety in your community, it'll spread. But if your HOA says, we don't care, you're out there by yourself. But BSOA understands the issue. We've talked about it. They've said, look, we don't want to hold somebody up from doing the work just because they think they need to get a formal approval and file for approval and pay a fee. They're going to waive all that. The question they're trying to deal with now is, at what level do they decide they want to sit down and talk to you versus just saying, oh, you got to do mitigation work? Okay, go. And hopefully it'll all be that simple, but I got a notion that when you start thinning trees and removing some of the view, they're going to want to see what you're doing. But still, it's just a sit down. It's not a formal meeting. It's not a filing, and no money's involved. And since BSOA handles most of the architectural reviews in Big Sky, we hope that that'll just kind of spread and move on up to Yellowstone Club and Moonlight.
Got it. Yeah. Well, and there is there has been an instance of an insurance company pulling out a Big Sky. I have a letter from Nationwide Insurance that last April 2023, they pulled out of the Firelight condos, and the cost which is always passed on to the consumer, went up significantly. I don't know what the trends are. I don't know if that's, writing on the wall, but, is there a way that anybody here, maybe I can open this up to the panel, would suggest, to reach out to your insurance company yourself, your homeowner's insurance company? What would you suggest?
About 4 weeks ago, I was in a meeting with the Montana zoning people, the code people, and we were talking about what can you do to help us keep insurance. And one of the guys said, well, this is, of course, just somebody talking, but they said, sometimes when your insurance agent tells you you can't be insured, go around them and go straight to the company. And I know this has worked with Progressive. So if you have to do that, you do that. But again, if I didn't realize Nationwide was the one that pulled Firelight. But now we've got a Firelight neighborhood ambassador, so we're going to be working on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Liz, it looked like you had something to say there. Yeah.
Well, and we've been working with an underwriter, and I think he's in LA right now, which is why I can't get in touch with him to do presentations for the whole network. But he said, tongue-in-cheek, go around your agent and talk to the underwriter, because that's what your agent's going to do. And so talk to your underwriter and talk to someone who's a wildfire underwriter and understands it, because a lot of them don't. And so, like you said, you live in Big Sky, oh, too bad, you're high risk or very high risk or whatever. But the underwriters, some get it. And so go to your underwriter and talk to them.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's super helpful. I made a note to myself here. No, but well, that's great. Well, look, I'd love to open it up to any questions from the audience. It's hard for me to see, so you're going to have to, jump around or wave or something. But yeah.
I'm really interested to know from all of your experience.
Good question. It's about evacuation routes. So first off, let me just say that I think that there's a plan for this group or parts of this group to have another meeting in June that's going to specifically address evacuation routes and plans. One thing I would just quickly say is, in Paradise, one thing, and I don't want to dive into this too deeply, but one thing that they did, and there's a term for it that I can't think of, but they basically turned both lanes in a two-way road into a one-way out, and nobody's coming in the other way. Did it in Colorado too. But I don't know if anyone wants to quickly address that. I know we want to dive into it more in June, but yeah, Maddie.
So I was a part of an evacuation training where wildfire, Lahania, LA type wildfire hit Big Sky. And we had Yellowstone Club management there. We had resort management there. We had the sheriff's office. We didn't have Forest Service, but we had the sheriff's office. We had Big Sky Fire, and we all war gamed this out and talked about what evacuations, like telling the resort that, the wildfire wasn't up at the resort, so they were going to stop traffic, and that was going to be a shelter in place, and they were going to prioritize who we're doing. And the sheriffs in the valley shutting down 191 completely so that all traffic would be moving out one direction. And there are 3 ways out of Big Sky. There is over the Big Easy, Moonlight, and just which way are we going to coordinate that, and how is that going to happen? And in the room, we did that. And so those drills are happening on a basis, and all those organizations actually do have contact with each other in a quick manner. They set that up during that meeting so that the head guys, there are plans, and there are more plans coming with more organizations and things. But in an emergency level, we are wargaming that plan out, and we are doing these simulations, and we are preparing for this.
Yeah, go ahead, Liz. Yeah.
I'm familiar with Island Park, which is a very old community, and a lot of their subdivisions have one way in, one way out, and the dirt roads have 8 to 12-inch ruts. Make sure you know your evacuation route out of your subdivision, and that everyone in your HOA or subdivision or development knows that same route, and make sure those who come and visit know that route as well. You go to a hotel, and it tells you how to leave the hotel. We're all trying this in resort communities, that those who rent their homes and short-term rentals have the same thing posted on the back of their door. This is how you leave. Guests, people who are visitors, they know how they got there. They're going to try to leave the same way, and it might not be the route that they should choose. So a concerted, once again, it takes a community, but it also takes your small developments and communities to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's
And
really
I was
good
going to
point.
just add, and so last week I met with the sheriff and our training captain to start planning our next evacuation and triage training. So yeah, that is a very huge deal, is making sure that those we can, because one car breaks down, right? You got the other lane, like how are we going to do it? So mitigating the fuels along the evacuation routes are a big way to, a lot of times those people that got caught in their cars, they had a lot of wildland fuels right next to the cars. So we're trying to identify those places along the evacuation routes to mitigate the fuels to make it more of a survivable place. And most of the time, your car is that survivable place unless you're immediately adjacent to some substantial conductive heat.
We've got all kinds of stuff lined up for June. And it includes all this that we've been talking about. It will include the fire department, the sheriff, the county disaster management, and we will even show you different ways to evacuate in terms of which road do you not drive down, and how to assess whether you're going to be in danger if there's a fire here, but you got to get to there. One rule: do not go uphill, because that's the direction fire goes. So if we've got to evacuate in the next 2 months before June, remember that one rule: do not go uphill. And most of the people that I know are just going to shelter in place down in the meadow or at one of the big parking lots, or right here at the high school.
And that applies to bears too, because they'll catch
Yeah.
you if you run up those.
Just one more thing to mention on evacuation is Gallatin County has technology to do reverse 911s. Based from cell towers, they can draw polygons in an area, and the messaging only gets to that polygon. So like Maddie was talking about, it's complex. A fire could never hit everywhere at once, at least in the beginning. So it's really important to pay attention. They basically come through your phone like Amber Alerts that you get. And so Porcupine Fire, I'm sure a lot of us remember that. If you lived in Ramshorn, you got that message, and if you were within that polygon. So there's a lot of technology. Everbridge, that QR code, just download that on your phone. That's another way that Gallatin County, their emergency services, can contact you and really get the word out of where we should be going and where the shelter-in-place locations are.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for reiterating the Everbridge thing. I think that's the biggest, one of the biggest tools that you have for alerts is just, and they'll let you know, hey, sit tight. Don't panic and drive down the road and get stuck in traffic with everybody else if you don't need to. But yeah, I think signing up for that app, that Everbridge app, is really key. Along with sort of situational awareness and just and being, as Liz was saying, letting, if you're renting out your place short term or long term, making sure that those renters understand what the plan is, where to go, who to call, sign up for Everbridge, all that stuff. But thanks everybody for that. Got time for a couple more questions, perhaps. If we didn't cover everything, we've basically answered all your questions about wildfire, which is amazing. That's good, nice work, guys. Right on. Thanks, everybody. Just sort of, in closing, I just want to say what a great discussion. Thank you all for coming. Please put your hands together for our panelists one more time. And also keep clapping for the Big Sky Fire Department and the firefighters around the country, putting their lives at risk to help us safe, keep us safe. And thanks again to the Wampac staff, and really a special thank you to Janelle Johnson here in the front, who really lit a fire, pun intended, there under our asses to get this event organized. But yeah, stay tuned for news about a potential another community awareness, wildfire awareness meeting in June. And just in closing, it takes a proactive effort to get ahead of any disaster. It takes planning on every level. It takes preparation from federal agencies, from county commissioners, from town governments, or town leaders, from the fire department, from HOAs. But at the end of the day, safety really does take a personal accountability. So to learn and understand and ask questions if you don't, and to read and do research and make a plan ahead of time, as Liz was saying, because fire won't wait.